The White House, the most powerful building in America, home to presidents, first families, and according to some, things that refuse to leave. What I'm about to share with you are 6 real accounts from people who worked the night shift at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Security guards, cleaning staff, Secret Service agents, people who signed NDAs that would destroy their careers if they broke them. But some experiences are too terrifying to keep quiet. These aren't made-up stories or tourist tales. These are real accounts from people who worked in those halls late at night, when the cameras were off and all the visitors went home, when the White House belonged to the living and the dead. I've changed names and identifying details to protect these sources, but every word they told me still gives me chills. So before we start, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. And after you hear all 6 stories, tell me which one messed with your head the most. Because trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at the White House the same way again. Let's begin with Sarah, a cleaning supervisor who worked the graveyard shift for 8 years. I never believed in ghosts until I started working at the White House. My name is Sarah, and I was part of the overnight cleaning crew from 2015 to 2023. What happened to me in the Lincoln bedroom still makes my hands shake. It was November 15th, 2018, around 2:30 in the morning. I was doing my usual rounds on the 2nd floor of the residence. The Lincoln bedroom was my last stop before heading to the East Wing. I'd cleaned that room hundreds of times. It's just furniture and old paintings, right? I unlocked the door with my master key and turned on the lights. Everything looked normal. The massive Victorian bed dominated the room, and Lincoln's portrait hung on the wall like always. I started dusting the nightstand when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth across the wooden floor. But here's the thing, I was the only person in the room. The sound was coming from right behind me, but when I turned around, nothing was there. I told myself it was pipes or settling wood. Old buildings make noise, especially one from 1792. I kept cleaning, but the footsteps continued, back and forth, like someone deep in thought, wrestling with an impossible decision. Then the temperature dropped. I mean, plummeted. My breath started fogging up, and goosebumps covered my arms. The central heating was working fine. I could hear it humming through the vents, but that room felt like a freezer. I finished dusting as fast as I could and headed for the door. That's when I heard the voice. The Union must be preserved, clear as day. A deep, weary voice spoke those words right behind my left ear. I spun around so fast I knocked over my cleaning cart. Bottles of Windex and paper towels scattered across the floor. The room was empty. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I grabbed my supplies and ran. Didn't even bother picking up the mess. I just ran. The next morning, I asked my supervisor if anyone else had experienced weird things in the Lincoln bedroom. She gave me this look, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. She pulled me into her office and closed the door. "You heard the footsteps, didn't you?" she said. Turns out I wasn't the first. Over the years, multiple cleaning staff had reported the same thing. Heavy footsteps, sudden temperature drops, and that voice, always the same phrase, "The Union must be preserved." My supervisor told me that during the Civil War, Lincoln would pace that exact room for hours, agonizing over decisions that would affect millions of lives. The Emancipation Proclamation, battle strategies, whether to preserve the Union at any cost. Some people believe strong emotions can leave an imprint, she explained. And Lincoln carried the weight of a dying nation on his shoulders. I asked why they didn't report it or do something about it. She laughed, but not in a funny way. More like a nervous, "what choice do we have" laugh. Report what? That the 16th president is still worried about the country? They'd fire us all and claim we were making it up for attention. She was right. Who would believe us? And honestly, part of me didn't want to believe it either, but I couldn't ignore what I'd experienced. I kept working the night shift for 5 more years, but I never cleaned the Lincoln bedroom alone again. I always brought someone with me. And you know what? Every single person who entered that room at night reported the same things. The footsteps, the cold, the voice. One night in 2021, my partner Jessica heard something different. Instead of, "The Union must be preserved," the voice said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." She recognized it as one of Lincoln's most famous quotes, but hearing it spoken in an empty room by someone who'd been dead for over 150 years, that's not something you forget. The weirdest part is that it only happened at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. During the day, that room felt completely normal. Tourists would take pictures and talk about the history, never knowing that after dark, history was still being lived. I quit in 2023, but not because of Lincoln. Honestly, his presence felt protective, like he was still watching over the country he died to save. But there were other things in that building, darker things that didn't feel protective at all. Sometimes I drive past the White House on my way to work at my new job. I look up at those second-floor windows and wonder if he's still there, still pacing, still carrying the burden of a nation that never seems to find peace. The Lincoln bedroom is supposed to be a place of honor, where distinguished guests sleep, surrounded by history. But I know the truth. At night, when the world is quiet and the weight of presidential decisions feels heaviest, Abraham Lincoln is still there, still working, still trying to preserve the union he gave his life to protect. And honestly, knowing he's watching over us makes me sleep a little better at night. My name is Marcus, and I was a Secret Service agent assigned to the White House from 2016 to 2022. What I witnessed in the Oval Office during a routine midnight security check still haunts me 6 years later. It was January 8th, 2019, a Tuesday night. The president was at Camp David, so the West Wing was supposed to be empty, except for essential security personnel. I was doing my standard walkthrough at 12:45 a.m. when I noticed light coming from under the Oval Office door. That was wrong, very wrong. The Oval Office is never occupied that late unless there's a national emergency, and we'd received no alerts about anyone authorized to be in there. I radioed my partner Tom, who was monitoring the security feeds from the basement. "Tom, are you seeing anyone in the Oval Office?" "Negative. Cameras show it's empty." "Why?" I stared at the strip of light under the door, definitely coming from inside the room. "I'm seeing light. I'm going to check it out." I approached the door slowly, my hand on my weapon. The light was warm and yellowish, not like the harsh LED bulbs we used throughout the building. It looked more like candlelight or an old-fashioned desk lamp. I pressed my ear to the door and heard something that made my blood freeze. Someone was typing on what sounded like an old manual typewriter. Slow, deliberate pecking of keys, followed by the ding of a carriage return. But the Oval Office didn't have any typewriters. Everything was digital, high-tech equipment. I knocked on the door and announced myself. "Secret Service, please identify yourself." The typing stopped immediately. I waited 30 seconds, then used my master key to unlock the door. I pushed it open slowly, my flashlight ready, and stepped inside. The room was pitch black. Not a single light was on. No desk lamp, no overhead lights, nothing. But I had clearly seen light under the door just moments before. I swept my flashlight across the room. Everything looked normal. The president's desk was clean and organized. No typewriter anywhere. I called Tom again. "Anything on the cameras?" Still showing empty. "Are you sure you saw light?" I was sure, but there was no evidence of anyone being in that room. I did a thorough search anyway, behind the curtains, in the adjoining bathroom, everywhere someone could hide. Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the president's desk that hadn't been there earlier. A single sheet of paper, perfectly centered on the leather desk pad. I shined my light on it and felt my knees go weak. It was typed text, old-style typewriter font, slightly uneven letters that you only get from manual keys striking paper. But what really terrified me was what it said. "The office of the president is not for personal gain. It is a sacred trust. Those who forget this truth invite consequence." I stared at those words, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The paper looked aged, yellowed around the edges like it had been sitting in a filing cabinet for decades, but it hadn't been there when I started my rounds. I was absolutely certain. I photographed the paper and radioed my supervisor. Within minutes, the Oval Office was swarming with agents and technical specialists. They dusted for fingerprints, checked the security footage again, and searched every inch of the West Wing. They found nothing. No unauthorized entry, No evidence of anyone being in the building who shouldn't have been there. The security footage showed the Oval Office empty all night, except for my own entry. But the paper was real. Physical evidence that someone or something had been there. My supervisor pulled me aside the next morning. "Marcus, this stays between us. We can't have stories about mysterious typewriters and ghost messages circulating through the press." But he also told me something that made everything worse. I wasn't the first agent to report strange activity in the Oval Office during night shifts. Over the years, several guards had heard typing, voices, or seen lights when the room was supposed to be empty. "There's a theory," he said quietly, "that the stress and intensity of presidential decisions leave some kind of impression, like an echo that replays itself." He explained that some of the most critical moments in American history had happened in that office. Decisions about war, civil rights, economic crises, life and death choices that affected millions of people. "Maybe some of that energy doesn't just disappear," he said. "I kept working the night shift for 3 more years, but I was never assigned to patrol the West Wing alone again, always in pairs. And you know what? Other agents started reporting similar incidents, typing sounds, mysterious papers, lights that appeared and disappeared. The most unsettling part was the message on that paper. Those who forget this truth invite consequence. It felt like a warning, like someone was still watching, still judging whether the current occupant was worthy of the office. I never found out who left that message. But sometimes, when I see news about corruption or abuse of power, I wonder if they're still there, still typing, still keeping watch. The Oval Office represents the pinnacle of American democracy, but it also carries the weight of every decision ever made within those walls. And sometimes, late at night, that weight becomes too heavy for the living to bear alone. My name is Elena, and I worked as a sous chef in the White House kitchen from 2017 to 2024. What happened to me during prep for a state dinner will forever change how I think about the dead watching over us. It was March 23rd, 2020, around 1:15 in the morning. COVID had just shut down most of the world, but we were still preparing for a scaled-down dinner with essential diplomatic staff. I was alone in the main kitchen, prepping vegetables for the next day's service. The White House kitchen is massive. Industrial ovens, walk-in freezers, prep stations that could handle a banquet for 200 people. During the day, it's chaotic. Chefs shouting orders, pots clanging, steam everywhere. But at night, it becomes this eerily quiet cathedral of stainless steel and shadows. I was dicing onions at the center island when I heard water running. Not unusual. The dishwashing station runs automatic cycles throughout the night, but this sounded different, like someone was washing dishes by hand the way you'd do at home. Gentle splashing, not the industrial spray of our commercial machines. I looked over toward the dish pit. All the machines were off, but I could clearly hear water running and the soft clink of dishes being moved around. "Hello?" I called out. Sometimes maintenance worked odd hours. "Anyone there?" The sounds stopped immediately. I walked over to investigate. The dish pit was bone dry. No water anywhere, no wet dishes, but the air above the sink felt humid and warm, like steam had just been rising from hot water. I told myself it was pipes, or maybe sound traveling from another part of the building. Old buildings are full of weird acoustics. I went back to my prep work, but 5 minutes later, the sound started again. This time, I heard something that made me drop my knife. Humming. Someone was humming a slow, melodic tune while they washed dishes. A woman's voice, soft and content, like she was enjoying her work. The melody was old-fashioned, something from the 1940s or 50s. I crept toward the dish pit again, my heart hammering. The humming continued, getting clearer as I approached. It was definitely coming from the sink area, where the sound of gentle dishwashing continued. When I reached the edge of the station, everything stopped, dead silence. But this time, I saw something that made me question my sanity. Water droplets on the dry stainless steel counter. Fresh drops, still beating up and rolling toward the drain, as if someone had just been washing dishes there seconds before. I backed away slowly, but I wasn't done being terrified yet. The humming started again, but now it was coming from behind me. I spun around and saw something that nearly stopped my heart. At the prep station where I'd been working, My knife was moving. Slicing through onions by itself is perfect. Even cuts. The blade rose and fell in a steady rhythm, while that same woman's voice hummed contentedly nearby. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just watched this invisible presence continue my work, cutting vegetables with the skill of someone who'd spent decades in professional kitchens. The humming stopped, and the knife clattered to the cutting board. In the sudden silence, I heard a voice, warm, motherly, with a slight southern accent. "Don't you worry, honey. I'm just helping out." I ran, left everything where it was, and sprinted out of the kitchen. I didn't stop until I reached the security desk in the East Wing, where I found Agent Rodriguez doing paperwork. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at how accurate that was, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Who would believe me? The next morning, I arrived early to check the prep station. The onions I'd been cutting were finished. Perfect. Professional knife work. Better than I could have done myself. And they were covered with plastic wrap and labeled in handwriting that wasn't mine. I asked the head chef, Miguel, if anyone else had been in the kitchen overnight. He looked at me strangely and said no, but then he pulled me aside. "Elena, did you hear the humming?" My blood went cold. "You've heard it too?" He nodded. Many of us have. Different shifts, different years. Always the same woman's voice, always humming while she works. Miguel had been at the White House for 15 years. He told me that back in the 1940s and 50s, there was a head cook named Viana who worked in that kitchen for over 20 years. She was beloved by the staff and the first families she served. She died of a heart attack right there at the prep station in 1953, he said. They say she was humming when they found her. He explained that kitchen staff had been reporting encounters with Viana for decades, tools moving by themselves, prep work mysteriously completed overnight, and always that gentle humming of someone who loved her job. "She's not scary," Miguel said. "She's helpful, like she can't stop taking care of people, even in death." Over my 7 years at the White House, I encountered Viana dozens of times. She never frightened me again. Instead, she became a comforting presence during long, stressful nights. If I was struggling with a difficult dish or running behind schedule, things would mysteriously start going smoother. Once, during a particularly chaotic state dinner prep, I was near tears trying to plate 150 desserts by myself. I stepped away for just a moment to catch my breath, and when I returned, half the plates were finished. Perfect presentation, exactly how I would have done it. "Thank you, Viana," I whispered to the empty kitchen. The humming started up again, soft and content, and I swear I could feel her smiling. Working in the White House kitchen taught me that some people are so dedicated to service that death can't stop them. Viana spent her life nourishing presidents and their families, and apparently, that calling transcends the grave. I left the White House last year, but I still think about her. Sometimes, when I'm cooking at home and feeling overwhelmed, I start humming that old melody she taught me. And just for a moment, I feel her presence again, reminding me that cooking with love is the most important ingredient of all. My name is David, and I served as a Secret Service agent at the White House from 2018 to 2023. What my partner and I witnessed in the map room changed everything I thought I knew about the impossible. It was September 11th, 2021, the 20th anniversary of the attacks. The president was at a memorial service in New York, but we maintained full security protocols at the White House. I was partnered with Agent Morrison for the overnight shift, monitoring the state floor. Around 3:20 a.m., our motion sensors triggered an alert in the map room. That's unusual because it's not a high-traffic area at night, and no one was authorized to be there. Morrison and I approached the room cautiously. The map room sits on the ground floor of the residence, traditionally used for diplomatic meetings and military briefings. During World War II, FDR used it to track Allied movements across Europe and the Pacific. We could see light seeping from under the door, a warm amber glow that didn't match our LED lighting system. Morrison radioed dispatch while I positioned myself beside the entrance. "Control, we have unauthorized light activity in the map room. Requesting backup." "Copy that. Backup en route. Cameras show the room is empty." But our eyes told us something different. That light was definitely coming from inside, and I could hear voices, low, urgent conversation between multiple people. Morrison and I exchanged glances. We'd worked together for 3 years, and I could see my own confusion reflected in his face. Our equipment said the room was empty, but our senses said otherwise. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. The voices were clearer now, at least 3 men discussing what sounded like military strategy. I caught fragments: Pacific Theater, casualty reports, Homeland Security. One voice stood out, authoritative, with a distinct mid-Atlantic accent that you don't hear anymore. He was giving what sounded like orders or making critical decisions. Morrison tried the door handle, locked, which was standard protocol. I used my master key, and we entered with weapons drawn. The room was pitch black, no lights anywhere, no people. But the conversation didn't stop when we entered. It just got quieter, like people whispering in the far corner. I swept my flashlight across the room while Morrison called for emergency lighting. That's when we both saw it. The large map table in the center of the room was covered with what looked like military documents and photographs, black and white images that seemed to glow in our flashlight beams. But here's what really messed with our heads. The documents were constantly changing. One second, I'd see photos of what looked like Pearl Harbor. Next, they'd shift to European battlefields, then images of the Twin Towers, like someone was rapidly shuffling through decades of American military history. "Are you seeing this?" Morrison whispered. Before I could answer, the emergency lights kicked on, flooding the room with harsh white illumination. Everything vanished. The table was completely clear. No documents, no photographs, nothing. Just polished wood reflecting our stunned faces. But the voices continued. Now they sounded like they were coming from all around us, echoing off the walls. The conversation had shifted to more recent concerns: terrorist cells, cyber warfare, protecting the homeland. Morrison stepped toward the center of the room, and suddenly the temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and frost started forming on the windows. "Gentlemen," the authoritative voice spoke directly to us, clear as day. "The watch continues." Then silence, complete, absolute silence. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds, both afraid to move or speak. Finally, Morrison broke the spell. "Control, map room is secure. False alarm." I stared at him. "False alarm?" He gave me a look that said we'd discuss this later. Backup arrived 2 minutes later, but we told them everything was fine, just a sensor malfunction. After our shift ended, Morrison pulled me aside. "What we saw there, it stays between us." But he also told me something that explained everything. During his Secret Service training, instructors had mentioned historical imprints in certain White House rooms. Places where critical decisions had been made retained some kind of energy from those moments. "The map room has seen every major military decision since World War II, he said. FDR planning D-Day. Eisenhower managed the Cold War. Bush responded to 9/11. Maybe some part of those moments never left. Over my remaining 2 years at the White House, I heard other agents whisper about similar experiences in the map room, always on significant anniversaries, always involving voices discussing threats to national security. The theory among veteran agents was that the room held the collective memory of America's defenders, presidents, generals, intelligence officers who'd made life and death decisions within those walls. "They're still on duty," one 20-year veteran told me, "still watching over the country they swore to protect." I never experienced anything like that again, but I requested reassignment away from the state floor. Some mysteries are too heavy to carry, especially when you realize that the responsibility of protecting America might extend beyond death itself. The map room taught me that service to a country doesn't end with a heartbeat. Somewhere in those walls, the greatest generation is still fighting for our freedom. My name is Carmen, and I was a housekeeper on the White House residence floors from 2014 to 2022. What I experienced while cleaning the family quarters proved that some souls never leave the place they called home. It was December 7th, 2019, around 4:30 in the morning. I was working my usual shift on the second and third floors of the residence, where the first family's private living space is located. These floors are off limits to tourists and most staff. Only essential personnel with the highest security clearance can access them. I was cleaning the yellow oval room when I heard piano music drifting down the hallway. Soft, melancholy classical pieces played with expert skill. The notes echoed beautifully through the residence, which has amazing acoustics thanks to its high ceilings and marble floors. My first thought was that someone in the first family was up early, practicing, or maybe unable to sleep, but I knew the schedule. They were all at Camp David for the weekend. The residence was supposed to be empty except for security and cleaning staff. I followed the music down the center hall toward the yellow oval room's sitting area. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, something that sounded like Chopin or Debussy. Each note was played with perfect timing and emotion, like listening to a concert pianist. As I got closer, I could see light coming from the small piano room adjacent to the main sitting area. Warm, golden light that looked like lamplight rather than our standard overhead fixtures. I approached carefully and peered around the doorframe. A woman was sitting at the grand piano, her back to me. She wore an elegant evening gown from what looked like the 1960s, navy blue, with a pearl necklace that caught the lamplight. Her hair was styled in a perfect bouffant, and her posture was graceful and refined. But here's what made my heart stop. She was translucent. I could see through her to the piano bench and wall behind. She continued playing, completely absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, bringing this incredible, sorrowful melody to life. I stood frozen, afraid to move or breathe, just listening to this impossible concert. The piece ended, and she paused with her hands resting on the keys. Then she spoke, without turning around. Music heals the broken places in our hearts. Her voice was soft, cultured, with just a hint of a southern accent. There was deep sadness in those words, like she was speaking from personal experience with heartbreak. She began playing again, a different piece, even more beautiful than the first. I realized I was crying. Something about her music touched a place in my soul that I didn't even know existed. I must have made a sound, because she stopped playing and slowly turned to look at me. Her face was kind but incredibly sad. She looked to be in her 30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to carry the weight of profound loss. When she smiled at me, it was the most heartbreaking thing I'd ever seen. "Don't be afraid, dear," she said. "I'm just visiting old friends." She gestured toward the walls, which were covered with family photos and portraits. For the first time, I noticed that many of the pictures seemed to glow softly in the lamplight, as if lit from within. "This was my home once," she continued. "The happiest and saddest days of my life happened within these walls." She turned back to the piano and began playing what I later learned was Für Elise, but her version was slower, more melancholy than I'd ever heard it played. "I come back sometimes, when the weight of this place feels too heavy for the living to bear alone," she said while playing. Music reminds us that beauty can survive even the darkest moments. As the last notes faded away, she slowly began to fade too. The lamplight dimmed, and her figure became more and more transparent until she was just a whisper of movement at the piano bench. "Remember," her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Home is where love lives, even when love seems lost forever." Then she was gone. The room was dark and empty, as if nothing had happened. I stood there shaking for several minutes before I could move. When I finally approached the piano, the bench was warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. The next morning, I researched former first ladies who might match the woman I'd seen. Based on her appearance, clothing style, and the time frame, I believe I encountered Jacqueline Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy lived in the White House during some of America's most turbulent years. She brought arts and culture to the residence, hosting concerts and celebrating American creativity. But she also endured an unimaginable tragedy, losing her husband to an assassin's bullet while the world watched. Other housekeeping staff confirmed my experience. Over the years, many had heard piano music from empty rooms, especially around significant dates like the anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. "She returns when the country feels broken," one veteran housekeeper told me, "like she's reminding us that grace and beauty can survive anything." I encountered her twice more during my time at the White House, always playing piano, always with that same message about music healing our broken places. The White House is more than a building. It's a home where real families have loved and lost and hoped for better days. Some of that love is so strong it never leaves, continuing to comfort future generations who walk those same halls. My name is Thomas, and I was part of the White House maintenance crew from 2016 to 2023. What I discovered in the underground tunnel system beneath the building revealed that some secrets are buried for good reason. It was October 31st, 2020, Halloween night, though that timing felt cruelly ironic later. A water main had burst in the sub-basement levels, and I was sent down to assess the damage and begin emergency repairs. The White House has an extensive underground network that most people don't know about. Multiple levels of basements, tunnels connecting to other government buildings, secure bunkers, and maintenance areas that stretch far beyond the building's footprint above ground. I was working on level B3, 3 floors below the main basement, in a tunnel that connects to the Treasury building. The water damage was worse than expected. Several inches of standing water and electrical systems that needed immediate attention. Around 11:45 p.m., I was alone in the tunnel, using an industrial wet vacuum to clear the flooding. The work was loud and monotonous, so at first I didn't notice the new sound mixing with the machine noise. Footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps echoing through the tunnel. I shut off the vacuum and listened. The footsteps continued, heavy boots marching in formation, like a military patrol moving through the underground passages. That was impossible. These tunnels were restricted access. Only essential personnel with the highest clearance could enter, and I'd been notified that I was the only person authorized to be down there that night. The marching grew closer. I could hear voices now, men talking in urgent, hushed tones, but the acoustics of the tunnels made it hard to pinpoint exactly where they were coming from. I grabbed my radio and called security. "This is Thomas in Tunnel B3. I'm hearing unauthorized personnel in the underground system." Static. No response. I tried again. Nothing. The radio was dead, even though it had been working fine minutes earlier. The footsteps stopped directly around the corner from where I was working. I could hear breathing and the rustle of clothing, like several people had paused just out of sight. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. "The package is secure. Proceed to the extraction point, Alpha. Copy that. Eliminate any witnesses." My hands started shaking. These weren't White House staff or authorized personnel. Something was very wrong. I turned off my work lights and crouched behind a maintenance panel, trying to make myself invisible. The tunnel was pitch black, except for the emergency lighting every 50 feet. That's when I saw them. Shadows moving along the tunnel wall. Human figures, but wrong somehow. They moved too smoothly, like they were gliding rather than walking. And they were translucent. I could see the tunnel wall through their forms. But the voices were real, clear, and threatening. "Search this section. Someone's been here recently." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. One of the shadow figures passed right by my hiding spot. As it moved through a patch of emergency lighting, I got a clear look. It was a man in what looked like 1970s military gear. Combat fatigues, tactical vest, weapons that looked like they belonged in Vietnam. His face was grim and focused, but there was something else, a look of desperate urgency, like he was carrying out a mission of critical importance. More figures moved past, all dressed in the same outdated military gear, all with the same translucent, shadow-like quality, but their voices and footsteps sounded completely real. I counted 6 of them before they moved further down the tunnel. Their conversation continued, but it was getting harder to understand as they moved away. "Security breach in Sector 7. Cover-up protocols in effect. This never happened." Those last 3 words echoed through the tunnel with chilling finality. I stayed hidden for another 20 minutes before I felt safe enough to move. When I finally emerged, the tunnel was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, no sign that anyone had been there. But there was evidence they'd been real. Wet boot prints in the standing water, fresh prints that weren't mine, showing the tread pattern of military combat boots. They led down the tunnel in the exact direction the shadow figures had traveled. I followed the prints for about 100 yards before they simply ended. Not like someone had left the tunnel or changed direction. They just stopped existing, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I finished my work as quickly as possible and got out of there. The next morning, I reported the incident to my supervisor, but he shut me down immediately. Thomas, you were working alone in a restricted area at midnight on Halloween. Stress and isolation can play tricks on your mind. But he also transferred me to day shift and made sure I never worked the underground levels alone again. Later, I did some research into the White House's history during the 1970s. That was a period of intense political upheaval: Watergate, Vietnam, government agencies operating in moral gray areas. There were rumors of covert operations, intelligence agencies using the White House's underground network for purposes that were never officially acknowledged. Operations that required absolute secrecy and left no paper trail. My theory is that some missions were so classified, so morally ambiguous, that the people who carried them out could never find peace. They're still down there, still following orders from presidents who died decades ago, still protecting secrets that were buried for good reason. The underground tunnels of the White House hold more than pipes and electrical systems. They hold the shadow history of American power, the decisions and actions that never make it into textbooks. Sometimes, late at night, that shadow history comes alive, and the people who carried out those impossible orders are still on duty, still keeping secrets, still protecting a version of America that exists only in the darkness below. I left the White House in 2023, but I still think about those shadow soldiers. Part of me hopes they find peace, but another part of me wonders if some secrets are so important that they require eternal guardians. Either way, I'm glad I don't work the night shift anymore. So there you have it. 6 terrifying encounters from inside America's most powerful building. Which story gave you the worst chills? Drop a comment and let me know if it was Lincoln still pacing, the shadow soldiers in the tunnels, or something else entirely. And if you've got your own paranormal experience to share, I might feature it in the next video. Hit that subscribe button if you want more true horror stories that'll keep you up at night.